On Friday, we come to Jesus' Roman trial and the crucifixion. This passage, to me, is the hardest and the most incredibly wonderful passage in Scripture. I really appreciated reflecting on it during the past several days and reflecting on what I've heard from other folks about it, including some of you. Mark 15 opens with Jesus on trial again. This time it's before Pilate. The religious leaders accuse Jesus of several different offenses, but Pilate has no desire at all to try this case. He knows they don't have a case. He knows that Jesus is innocent, but he has to do something. The people are up in arms, and he's already on probation for some bad choices he made, which didn't keep the peace in other places he had been. But he's looking for an escape, and perhaps his escape will be the custom of releasing one prisoner during this celebration. Mark 15:6-10. Now at the feast, Pilate, was accustomed to releasing one prisoner to them, whomever they requested. And there was one named Barabbas, who was chained with his fellow rebels. They had committed murder in the rebellion. Then the multitude, crying aloud, began to ask him to do just as he had always done for them. But Pilate answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews?" For he knew that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. There are so many ironies in this account. Barabbas was a convicted murderer. Will Pilate knowingly free a guilty man and condemn an innocent one? Will he pardon one who has taken life and sentence one who gives new life? Mark continues, chapter 15, verses 11-15. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd so that he should rather release Barabbas to him. Pilate answered and said to him again, "What then do you want me to do with him whom you call the King of the Jews?" So they cried out again, "Crucify him!" Then Pilate said to him, "Why, what evil has he done?" But they cried out all the more, "Crucify him!" So Pilate, wanting to gratify the crowd, released Barabbas to him, and he delivered Jesus after he had scourged him to be crucified. The word crucifixion, the sentence of crucifixion, comes first out of the mouths of the Jewish crowd, not the Romans. The leaders of the people wanted Jesus dead, and treason is the only capital offense that they could make stick. He claimed he was the King of the Jews. They testify, one more irony, they testify that for their king, they would rather have a Roman Caesar than a Jewish Jesus. The Romans reserved crucifixion for their worst offenders. Another irony when you consider that it's the death sentence for the Prince of Peace. The Romans had perfected crucifixion into both a work of science and a work of art. It was a slow, horrible death, and it was a very public warning to keep the peace. Noticeably and almost thankfully, Mark doesn't give us many of the gory details. Let's look at the passage. Mark 15:22-23 and in verse 25. And they brought him to the place Golgotha, which is translated place of the skull. Then they gave him wine mingled with myrrh to drink, but he didn't take it. Now it was the third hour, and they crucified him. Imagine what Jesus' followers felt as they watched this scene, as he was nailed to the cross, as the cross was put in its stand, as they watched this man they'd followed for years being crucified. Here was a man who calmed the wind and the waves. He'd healed the sick. He had raised the dead. He had raised people they knew. miraculous power just by his word. Here was a man less than a week before who'd been given a king's welcome to Jerusalem. Here was the Christ. How could this be happening? How incredible that some of the crowd that had cheered when he entered the city and had witnessed some of his healing, his miracles only a few days ago, were now blaspheming him, mocking him. Let's look at Mark 15, 31 to 33. Likewise, the chief priests also, mocking among themselves with the scribes, said, He saved others, himself he cannot save. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross, that we may see and believe. Even those who were crucified with him reviled him. Now when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all show us that the crucial events of Jesus' death happened in the dark. His betrayal in Gethsemane, the trial before the Sanhedrin happened at night. And now, even in daytime, darkness descends, a supernatural darkness. In the Bible, darkness during the day is always a sign of God's judgment, his great displeasure. For instance, the 3-day plague in Egypt before the first Passover. So darkness fell at the time of Jesus on the cross, at the time of his death. But who's God judging? Mark 15:34. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? I try to imagine what I would cry out in that situation. Would I cry out my arms, my hands, my feet? Would I cry out my wife? What does Jesus cry out? He says, my God, my God. That's a language of closeness, of relationship, of love. To call someone my wife, my son, my daughter shows a close relationship. God had said, I will be your God, and you shall be my people. Through this, my God, it's the way that God said someone could address him if they had a close relationship with him. My God, you've forsaken me. This was brokenness. This was loss. The Father had loved his Son from eternity past, but just now he was forsaking him. He was turning away. What did that darkness during the daytime mean? Who was God judging? Jesus. Jesus was experiencing our judgment day. My God, why have you forsaken me? The answer is for you, for me, for us. Jesus was forsaken by God so that we would never have to be forsaken. The judgment that should have fallen on us fell instead on Jesus. He died the death we should die to save us from the judgment and bring us into the relationship with God. The same close relationship. My God, my God. And Jesus cried out with a loud voice and breathed his last. Then the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So when the centurion who stood opposite saw that he cried out like this and breathed his last, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. The curtain of the temple separated sinful people from a holy God. Simultaneously, when Jesus died, the curtain was ripped in two from top to bottom. When Jesus died, anybody who believed in him could now go in and connect to God. The barrier was gone for good. Anyone who believes can go in. And then Mark points us to the first person who went in, the centurion. Truly, this man was the Son of God. Up to this point in Mark, nobody had figured it out. All along, Jesus' teaching had authority. They recognize it. His miracles showed authority. They pointed to the fact that he was divine. But all the while, the people had been asking, even his disciples, who is this man? But the first person to get it right was a centurion, the man who presided over his death. Think about it. The only person a loyal Roman could truly call the Son of God was Caesar. It was required. It was law. But this man recognized that in Jesus, not only a king, but the true Son of God, and it changed him. What had so drastically impacted him that he came to this conclusion? He was close enough. He was close enough to hear his last words and to see him die. He heard his cry and he saw him die. The centurion was in charge of the crucifixion, obviously, but he had been there all the time. He had seen the crowds mocking and jeering Jesus. He had seen the women who loved Jesus standing there weeping, going through agony. He had seen many men die during his career. And almost all died as their life slowly seeped away and they passed away, suffering in silence. Their life was taken from them. This man shouted out. Jesus was awake until the end, and his life was not taken from him. This man gave his life. This was voluntary death, not in a coma, but in a shout, not in weakness, but in power. The centurion heard his cry and saw him die like no man ever had, like only the Son of Man could. Listen closely to Jesus' cry, my God, why have you forsaken me? Think about it over these next few days. Again, Jesus lost the infinite love of his Father because of his infinite love for you. Your sin separates you from God, but he paid the penalty for your sin so you can have a relationship with God. On the cross, he ultimately proves how much he loves you. The Son was abandoned so that the Father would never abandon you. Jesus took your hard heart and death so that you can have tenderness and life. Truly, this was the Son of God.